from bed and the framework for what's going to eventually be a fully enclosed inner structure that I called the incubator. Um, what I did for my framework, instead of taking a bunch of logs that were like, this diameter or something, I had a bunch of thin little poles more like this that were springy and green. And I probably had 25, 30 of those that I laid lengthwise along my bed. And because they were springy and because I kept it so that they weren't overly supported, my bed had some bounce to it. It was not a rigid bunch of logs. It actually had a little bit of give to it, which was kind of nice. Still ended up, with a lot of sore spots at night sleeping, but even with several inches of material over the top of those. But it worked out. It was kind of a cool plan. It was a lot easier to deal with those little poles than trying to cut through larger material. I did not bring a saw with me. I did everything with my axe, which worked brilliantly. But the other thing about me doing a bunch of these logs that are 7-8 feet long, instead of like 2 or 3 feet long for the width of the bed, is they go the length of the bed. There's a lot fewer of them you have to cut, so a fair amount of less weight. And this is kind of a a really wobbly, crooked stick. There are some beautifully straight poles up there of the spruce, tamarack, white spruce and black spruce and tamarack poles, and you could get just perfect rods out of them. It was really wonderful material to work with. It's only 24 degrees Fahrenheit that afternoon, and I go out to the head of my bay, and I see that it's actually frozen over in the night, meaning it got a lot colder than 24 degrees. And it finally dawns on me that these noises that I've been hearing for weeks weren't hooves and rocks. It was ice. These pieces of ice would come through there, and the Great Slave Lake is the 10th largest lake in the world. When you're out on the open shoreline, it's like you're out on the open ocean. There's huge waves crashing in, and my bay was getting some of those waves too. So you'd get a thin layer of ice, and then some waves would come through and crack it up into these sheets that would be shifting and banging into each other all night long. And that was the sound that I was hearing. That sounded like rocks on hooves. Earlier on in the season, they took some of my words from weeks in, and they put them into episode 1 for some reason to increase the dramatic effect of the moose that actually walked through Michelle's camp. But yeah, that was a real mystery. I've been thinking about that for probably 2 weeks at that time. It was really cool to figure that out. I go out to my gill net, and I get another fish, and I am just effusive. Maybe not quite so out loud, but my whole body was broken out in goosebumps. The act of getting a fish in that net was just so amazing, because it was a guaranteed week of food. That net, the mesh in that net was 5 inches, so we were required to have a certain size net, which means you weren't catching small fish in it. You were big game hunting. These things were big fish. And that fish that I happened to catch that time was the smallest fish I caught the whole time out there. It was still over 19 inches long. That's a big fish. It's probably bigger than anything I've ever caught from my caught lingcod bigger than that, but it's a big fish in my book, and I was super happy to have it. And it was a new species. I was beginning to worry that I was basically stuck to catching lake trout and only super big ones, meaning it was going to be far and few between that I would get another fish. And the lake trout might have only been there because they were spawning at the time. So once the spawn is over, does that mean I'm going to see any more? These things are always running through your mind, how can I leverage every little thing? And I was concerned about the fact that I had caught only 2 fish up to that point, and only 2 fish up to that point. We're nearly a month in, and they were both lunkers. I mean, they were both the 2 hugest fish I ever caught in my life. So to catch a new species and a quite much smaller fish was actually kind of a relief, because it meant that I had some more variety I could count on out there. I think that was the first of 3 white. I think I got at least 2 whitefish, and then I got an Nkanu lake whitefish, an Nkanu, which is a really close relative to them, in that net. all told, and I don't believe those other ones make it into the edit. So um, that was a pretty big day. I talk a little bit about my falling risk because the one place I had to deploy my net was on a fairly slippery rock slope that, when the temperatures dropped and when it snowed, was covered in ice. So I was on this gentle slope going out towards 10 or 12 feet deep of water, and also being lightheaded and lethargic, and my balance wasn't so good. And that catching that fish, pulling fish in from that net was a little bit of a risky situation. So I never did it without having my PFD on and without having my yellow brick on me, so I could even push that button if I were in the water if needed to. The previous episode, it was either 4 or 5. I actually legitimately black out right on the edge of the lake, but I can feel it coming just before it happens, and I actually deflect myself towards the further up shore when I go down, so that I land away from the lake instead of into it. But it was a concerning thing to me. They say that length of fish, 19 inches, would be about 4 pounds of meat on a lake trout. So I was catching on a lake whitefish. The lake trout that I had caught, which were 29 and a half and I think 31 and a half inches, those would have been, I bet, 15, 20 pounders. Those were huge fish. I remember my arm being tired from carrying them back to camp. And then I talk a little bit about how abstract the idea of winning $500,000 is. If you're if you're from the United States, a good deal of that money is going to disappear into taxes, like 45% of it or something like that, right off the bat. Comes right out of the check. So $250,000, and how that's like a pretty big abstraction. I haven't had a lot of money for most of my life, and I didn't want to just think about, oh, I'm going to have money. I wanted to think about what that would mean. What would my life look like if I had that money? How would I wisely spend it and not squander it? And what does wealth really mean to me? What do I value? What has meaning in my life? And I'm kind of pondering that a little bit. And I'm having the realization that if I win that money, it's the last time I have to worry about surviving again. Like, I have had to go through different kinds of survival in my life, which are very much have been financial. I've been a volunteer park ranger for 3 years of my life. I have done a lot of work that, they basically pay you enough to buy potatoes and top ramen, and you go bust your ass for months in a row, and at the end of it you have to move again because it's a seasonal job. You're working as a biologist or whatever. We have a real problem in our world today where the people who are out trying to be stewards of the planet, trying to do the most important work on Earth so that all other things can happen, are not getting paid for it. They're not being appreciated for it. They're working as volunteers, or they're making minimum wage or slightly more than that. And that's been my lifestyle for my adult life. And to think of seeing that struggle come to an end has had a lot of meaning for me. But I acknowledge at the end, I've lived a freaking amazing life. I intend to live a heck of a lot more of it, and I'm a very, very lucky guy, and I said so at the end of that. I really appreciate that they put that in the edit, because it is how I feel about my life and is how I feel about myself. I'm an extremely lucky man, and I like that they put that in there for me. Cuts to Michelle. She goes down to her shore, and she's got kind of a gentle sloping shore that has frozen over. So she's going out. I don't believe Michelle had an axe. Could be wrong about that, but I don't think she was one of the people who brought an axe. And once the ice started to freeze up, that axe was a heck of a handy tool. Be able to just hit the ice a few times and get a few big blocks of ice to carry to the shelter and turn into water instead of try and melt snow or try to walk out onto the ice and drink directly from the lake was a real benefit to me. Real quickly, the camera, you get switches to some B-roll of the shore of the lake, and it is a good view of the kind of wave action that comes in off that lake sometimes. It's super duper windy up there, and you're practically feeling like you're looking out over the ocean on a lot of that lake. It's very big. So there's a lot of fetch for some huge waves to get going out there, and it was also a lot of fetch for some wind to get going at your shelter, at your body. I was very exposed sometimes, especially at my fishing net, because of that. But you might notice that when you're looking at the footage of the show. She snares another rabbit because she's a freaking great trapper, and is, just coming back from the experience of seeing Swampgrass Susie all busted up on the shore, and she's just overwhelmed with tears of joy over it. A little later on, she ends up making a puppet out of a rabbit hide, and does a little puppet show for her kids, who she's talking about. And some people had a problem with that, saying she was being disrespectful to the rabbit. She didn't have any disrespect in her voice. She was trying to connect with her children. And if people weren't so busy bitching about, this thing that they don't have any knowledge of, like whether or not she was respectful of this rabbit after she was literally broke down crying over how happy she was to have it, they would have noticed that the puppet she made is the finest example of case skinning of a rabbit I've ever seen in my life. She did an amazing job of that. I'm not capable. I don't have that level of skill, not even close to what she did, to case skin that rabbit so that all its features, the face is good. It's like a full-on puppet still. And she tans the hide beautifully. It's got good movement to it. It's not a stiff, rawhide thing. I was really impressed with that, and I was really disappointed in people the next day who decided to take that opportunity to tear her down and say she was being disrespectful. You need to watch that again, because there's not an ounce of disrespect in her voice. She was trying to connect with her kids, and she again was having a good humorous attitude about it. She wants it hard. She wants to be out there bad, and again, Michelle is not going to leave the show unless she's dragged off kicking and screaming, or in a really bad way, or her loved ones come and get her. So watch for her to do some amazing, tough, hard things out there. On day 29, that cuts to Wonea, and her shoreline is also icing up, and she's realizing the season's really taking hold and beginning to change, and that motivates her to put some more work into her already pretty excellent shelter. And she does an incredible job of building a double insulated wall of logs on the gable end north side of her shelter. She falls a bunch of poles about the diameter of these things here, and puts up one wall, and then takes a bunch of poles the same diameter as these, and then peels all of them so that they're bright white, and they can dry out and be more insulated because they're not full of moisture. And does a second wall with a gap in between them of several inches, which she stuffs full of moss and boughs, and makes an insulated wall. And it's beautiful. Like everything's level. It's like she was out there with carpentry tools on a level. It worked really, really good. And she did it in a day, it looked like, which is really impressive out there. But I was just actually watching. Wonea has a YouTube channel as well called Buckskin Revolution. She does a thing. She does a video on her shelter up to that point during episode 6. So go over to her YouTube channel and check it out. She explained, I said earlier in some of the previous videos that I shot that a good shelter in a bad location is a bad shelter. And Wonea goes through her own thought processes of why she selected the shelter the site that she put her shelter, and the whole thought process of her shelter. It's really well thought out. She's brilliant. I would recommend looking at that video for her episode 6, and if you're somebody who cares about these skills and wants them to be functional, she has some really great stuff on that. It's about a 13-minute long video, I think. So check it out. So yeah, then it goes, we're at day 30, jumps over to Barry, and Barry's cans that he put out, his kind of noise alarms, got disturbed while he was kind of out cold on a nap, and he does a little bit of tracking and finds that it's fox prints in the snow. So a fox has come and disturbed whatever he was in. Barry's still thinking about bear though. He wants a bearskin blanket to sleep underneath. Cuts to Michelle, and Michelle is missing her family too. She's a mama. She's got a little boy, super cute little boy, husband, community that she's really tight with in her rural area, and she's missing them. That's when she kind of does the thing with the bunny, the case-skinned bunny puppet, and like I said, like that's really good footage of you can see the face of that thing and how amazing a job she did to skin that thing out and preserve it so beautifully. That to me is a sign of respect and talent, and I'm a little bit annoyed at people who decided to go somewhere else with that because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Back to Brady, excuse me. I noticed he's got a pretty sweet chair that's just barely into one of the corners of his footage, in front of his fireplace. It's like kind of like a recliner, like the type that Callie built in season 3, except it's not made out of bamboo; it's made out of logs. And it would have been cool if they'd have showed that a little bit more. There's no excuse for us to be out there making cool things that take some talent and skill, and it not be part of a tour that they're going to give of Everybody's Shelter. I think that's one of the most common complaints that I've heard of the show so far is, why aren't you guys showing the survival aspects of this survival show? Like, yeah, the drama is a piece of it. The psychology is a piece of it. I wish I could call the drama that they're showing as like something useful psychology-wise, but typically it's not. But there's cool stuff out there that we all did that nobody's ever going to know about because of it, and that's unfortunate because the show has the potential to be a lot more educational than it is, a lot more entertaining than it is, and it's just not where people's priorities are, unfortunately. Brady is having a really difficult time though with his time alone and his time away from his family. He's getting bored. Fishing doesn't really do it for him, doesn't hold his interest, and I talked about this earlier, he's got 4 kids and a wife back home. He's got activity going on all the time. He's in a busy workplace probably as well, and to just have his needs met and then sit there twiddling his thumbs doesn't work for him, and he starts to go a little bit stir crazy. He also talks about how when he's on deployment, because he's in the military, he would have the availability of a whole bunch of movies to watch every night or something. He could keep his mind occupied on something other than himself, and it's a skill that takes some development. And if you don't even realize that it's a skill that you don't have or that you're going to need, it's a hard thing to discover all of a sudden when you're a month in on this big ass journey that you just decided to take. He realizes, well, I think he's always known, but he really decides he needs to be with his family. He loves his kids. He misses them a lot, and lucky man, he's got them to go back to. That was really, really, really good for him to realize that. I'm sure he appreciates his family all the more because of it. On day, I think it's the morning of day 32, he taps out. He pulls out his sat phone, calls up production, and says, "Hey man, I'm out of here. I've got an awesome family at home. I need to go be with them." Can't fault him at all for that. Good job for them. But that's where episode 6 leaves off, and there's quite a few pretty cool teasers for episode 7. I'm really excited to watch, and or watch again rather. And yeah, I hope that you're kind of finding my insight on this to be some angles that you haven't necessarily looked at it from. There is a lot going on out there. There was 10 people living their 24/7 life out there in that environment, and we see a sliver of it, the finest a sliver like this of it, like nothing at all. So be really careful of anybody you're going to judge, or why didn't they do this, or da da da, how come they did it that way. You don't freaking know. They probably did do it, or they thought about it really hard and it just didn't work out. I know for my own self, I had, you know, plans to build all these different kinds of traps for these different animals that were, too far away for me to really honestly go and trap. If I was by about this time into the season, I had discovered a beaver pond about 2.5 miles from my camp, and it took me hours to get there. I found two beavers lodges in that pond, and I was allowed to catch one of them. So say I do that. Say I actually designed about 3 traps in my mind that all seemed like they would work really well. Say I go out there, set this underwater trap, and then what? I've got to go out there again the next day and check it, and I got to continue checking it every day until the trap is deployed, or until the trap has caught something. Somewhere in that period of time, the water might have frozen over, and that might have all been for nothing. Like there's just others, like I've got a snowshoe design that I never ended up doing because the snow never got that deep. So don't be judgmental of people out there. I am not having a very hard time of it myself, because I realize like how many things, dozens and dozens of things I wanted to do that really, had I done them, would have compromised my own ability to stay out there longer, because they just weren't going to pay off. And you have to be very calculating out there, and every little idea you have in your head, after giving it 5 seconds of thought, most of them don't work. So don't be judgmental. Don't pick on other people. You don't have a freaking clue, and particularly people who cry. If you think that there's a weakness in that, you are unaware of the strength that you're missing out on in your own life if you think crying is a weakness. There's a lot more to it than that. What are you afraid of? To experience your own emotions. That's cowardly, honestly. It's more cowardly to make fun of somebody else who does it on an online platform while you're, safely at home next to your refrigerator. I don't get behind that in one bit. So, if you're a person who's been doing that, knock it off. Yeah. Again, like I said, I teach survival skills. I teach the soft skills of survival as well as the hard skills, disaster preparedness, permaculture, direct living skills, and just adventures in general. So if you like the sound of that, please hit the subscribe button and contact me if you want some instruction in how to do these things. I freaking live to teach. I really love sharing this with other people, and I would love to share it with you. So hope you have a good one, and be useful.